In the 1980s, as Cold War tensions reached their peak, the KGB embarked on a sophisticated and covert campaign to undermine NATO and its nuclear strategy. One of the most audacious aspects of this effort was the promotion of peace movements in Western countries, particularly anti-nuclear protests. These seemingly grassroots movements, aimed at pressuring Western governments to disarm, were often subtly influenced, funded and manipulated by Soviet intelligence as part of a broader strategy to weaken the West's military posture. The Soviet Union understood the power of public opinion and sought to exploit growing fears about nuclear war, which had been fueled by the arms race between the United States and the USSR. Images of mushroom clouds, reports of devastating nuclear drills, and popular culture depictions of post-apocalyptic worlds created a fertile ground for anti-nuclear activism. The KGB saw an opportunity to amplify these fears, aligning the peace movement's goals with its own strategic interests. The KGB's involvement in promoting peace movements was multifaceted. One tactic was the covert funding of anti-nuclear organizations. Money flowed through intermediaries, including front groups, charities, and sympathetic individuals, ensuring that the connection to Moscow remained hidden. This funding supported protests, rallies, and publications that called for nuclear disarmament, particularly in Western Europe, where NATO's deployment of intermediate-range missiles was a contentious issue. Soviet intelligence also worked to shape the messaging of these movements. Through infiltrators and sympathizers, the KGB influenced slogans, pamphlets, and speeches to emphasize the dangers of U.S. nuclear policies while downplaying or ignoring Soviet nuclear capabilities. The narrative often framed the United States and NATO as the primary aggressors, painting the Soviet Union as a proponent of peace. One of the most significant examples of Soviet influence was the mass protests against NATO's deployment of Pershing II and cruise missiles in Europe during the early 1980s. The protests, which attracted millions of participants in cities like London, Bonn, and Amsterdam, were portrayed as spontaneous expressions of public outrage. However, declassified documents and defectors have since revealed that the KGB played a behind-the-scenes role in organizing and promoting these demonstrations. The KGB also targeted influential figures in the peace movement, including academics, artists, and political leaders. Soviet operatives cultivated relationships with these individuals, sometimes using ideological alignment or financial incentives to secure their cooperation. In other cases, the KGB disseminated propaganda materials that these figures would unwittingly use, further amplifying the Soviet narrative. But the manipulation wasn't limited to the West. The Soviet Union staged its own peace conferences and events, inviting prominent Western activists to attend. These gatherings, often lavishly funded, served as platforms for spreading Soviet disinformation while portraying the USSR as a champion of global peace. Attendees would return to their home countries with a skewed perspective, often sharing pro-Soviet views with their networks. Despite the KGB's efforts, the peace movements were not entirely controlled by Soviet intelligence. Many activists were genuinely committed to the cause of nuclear disarmament and had no knowledge of Moscow's involvement. This genuine passion gave the movements credibility and made them more effective tools for Soviet interests. The impact of the KGB's promotion of peace movements was significant. It heightened public pressure on Western governments, leading to debates and delays in the deployment of NATO's nuclear weapons. While the Soviet Union did not achieve its ultimate goal of forcing unilateral disarmament, it succeeded in sowing divisions within NATO and weakening public support for Western military policies. Today, the story of the KGB's involvement in peace movements serves as a cautionary tale about the manipulation of social and political causes. It highlights how legitimate fears and aspirations can be co-opted by hidden agendas, turning well-intentioned activism into a tool of statecraft. The legacy of these operations continues to resonate, reminding us of the blurred lines between genuine movements and covert influence in the battle for hearts and minds.